Hello and welcome to today's episode of Social Footprint. We're joined today with Chris Gale, who's part of We Are Group's team, and we'll be discussing the topic of cybersecurity. So in recent news, there's been a lot of talk about cybersecurity with the likes of Mark Zuckerberg and his contemporaries being made accountable for cybersecurity issues. So it's a really pivotal topic that's highly reflected in news. So Chris, can you tell me maybe the types of cybercrime that are common today?
It varies very much dependent on the demographic base. And cybersecurity, in particular, frauds, scams, are evolving all the time. We have the generalisation type, which is phishing or spear phishing, which, again, the random names can make people that are excluded from digital even more scared to kind of try and get engaged with it. I think the biggest thing for me when it comes to any cybersecurity issues is the constant evolution. Much like any disease that's out there, massively highlighted during the pandemic, the defences against them are only available retrospectively. And the people that are creating these scams, frauds, viruses are evolving them faster than we can protect against them, which actually not only makes firms and organisations more vulnerable, but actually the grassroots people on the ground, the users, even more vulnerable because they aren't able to, in their own individual way, think ahead and track the changes of things could happen. So as a generalisation, we box them into sort of different compartmental types, but it's a constant evolution. The lines are blurred constantly. And with the advent of AI, it's not just being used for good, unfortunately. The distinguishing factors that would identify something like a fraud or a scam, the lines are being blurred even more heavily at the moment.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. I mean, even me, myself, I've seen loads of new scams that are, like you said, the constant evolution of them. So QR code scams in car parks, robbing people of their money. I mean, what other ways are people affected and impacted by these kind of various types of cybercrime?
There's direct and indirect impact of these. Obviously, the direct impact of it is someone can lose money. They can be affected emotionally and psychologically because of the effect of what happens, a mistrust, and therefore a push away from using the digital solution. Which in today's society impacts them even more. We know that someone that isn't online is actually worse off than someone who is. So anything that pushes them away, it has a detrimental effect on them. And then if we look at the indirect impact of it, and we look at the people that are kind of on the fence digital, shall we say, just because someone's really prevalent on social media does not mean that they're astutely able to use everything that's online, which is a common misconception. But it's the people that are on the fence, the people that are just starting their digital journey or just sort of dipping their toes into the digital world and aren't quite really having the amazing benefits of the digital world that we know are out there. Once they fall victim to scam, you tend to lose them.
Okay.
And it also has the effect that, and I did see a statistic that was in the Lloyd's Digital Consumer Index, which was 53% of those offline, not included in the digital world, choose to be offline out of fear. And it's that fear of being scammed. It's that fear of having their identity stolen is a big thing. And it is a rarity. That is the extremity of what can happen. But unfortunately, it's dramatised by the news because news sells, and it's actually excluding people even further that are already excluded. So that would be the two types of impact of it: the direct, the people that get hit and then carry on, be that financially, be that emotionally and don't integrate, but also we've got the indirect, the fear of it stopping people wanting to be online.
Okay, no, that's really interesting. So I think, like you said, digital inclusion is definitely a spectrum. I think it's in the consumer index that 13 million are at the lowest digital capability, and then obviously you have a kind of an equal amount of 40 million at the highest, and then you have the variation in between. So that's really interesting. So in terms of the solutions perhaps to those challenges, what can organisations or businesses do then to kind of resolve digital issues for individuals and really safeguard them against cybercrime?
So that's a fantastic question. So if I look at any large organisation, and it doesn't matter which sector it's from, they have essentially built their house of digital, and the walls are particularly safe. They've got firewalls, but there will always be a vulnerability point to their system, which of a house is a front door. So the biggest vulnerability to an organisation is probably the customers that have to interact with it. If you think about any organisation that has to allow people either access to a portal, and particularly uploading particular files and folders, not particularly prevalent yet, but I would argue that in years to come, that is how large-scale cyber criminals are going to attack large organisations. So with that, for the organisations comes regulator fines for data breaches, compensation to their customers because their data's been taken. So I think when we're looking at support, we need to look at it in two different regions. It's the outward facing to the individual or the customer, but there is also a massive benefit to those organisations as well. So if we look at what's currently available, a lot of support for particularly online fraud and scam stuff, and there's a lot of phone-based stuff as well that comes from these organisations. And I think too often they're kind of separated out. So you got scammed online, here's our online learning portfolio, go and look at that, that will make you safer. Now, I know that firms and organisations are incurring massive cost because they're reimbursing the customer. And it's a particularly good thing. And I think it's great for the consumer because then they can understand that if they make a mistake, they're not going to lose out. Yeah. So if we look at human, for example, we can say that on average they're 80% reliable. That would be considered the benchmark with no performance influencing factors. If you introduce a performance influencing factor into them, that can be anything: illness, something that's going on in their life, a train that's late, anything that puts them there. Bearing in mind the majority of us do a lot of our digital solution via a smartphone, it's very easy to not interrogate the email correctly and click on a link when you're on a phone. Now, if you're that digitally capable, I would argue that, yeah, potentially an online solution would work of videos. And I will wholeheartedly say that the work that's been done with Experian in and around that's being used by a lot of firms, is particularly good. For those 14 million people that you said were in the high end of digital, they're confident it was a minor error. If we look at the other demographic, we need to look at, and particularly the lower end, we need to think about what puts them in that lower end. So the majority of stuff in this country will be in fairly technical English. English not as a first language, how are they capable of becoming more secure? All of our websites are in English, so that's a performance influencing factor that can open them up to having fraud. So we need to overcome that barrier. Adult illiteracy as well. You'll be surprised how many people out there actually know a website and know a thing by literally feeling their way around it. So if a scammer replicates that website, it looks completely identical. They can't identify the different things. So what I feel is in the instance of fear with those people that have a lower digital skill, and knowing that people that have potentially just started their journey are feeling vulnerable, we need to humanise the support without a shadow of a doubt. We need to continue to engage that individual when they're at their most vulnerable. Also, interestingly enough, some organisations out there that have large regulating organisations, they have a duty of care for their vulnerable customers. So just signposting isn't enough. I would personally want to know, and I always look at it with, if something happened to my child, what would I want to know? I'd want to know what happened, I'd want to get them the support they needed, and I'd want to know that they got the support they need. Yeah. So I think that's quite important for organisations. Okay. And if we take a step further and we look at full data breach, what we need to then know is not just safeguarding people in the moment, how can we safeguard people for a longer time? Yeah. We know that in data breach and in scam, that once a person has been identified to these scammers as vulnerable, they've fallen victim, often their information is sold on the dark web, which means they're more susceptible So it's not just a safeguard in the first place, it's continuing support afterwards to make it more robust.
Okay, no, there's a lot to unpack there, some really interesting comments. I think one of the interesting things you said that is that the onus a lot of the time is then put on the end user or the customer. It's kind of, here's this resource pack that you can use to prevent, falling victim to cybercrime. But like you said, the issue of kind of language barriers and whatnot. So kind of, is there a way that maybe partnerships might be helpful in that kind of solution, in terms of, like, again, the humanizing element, but also giving the end user that kind of time and that care and that tailored support? Is that possible, do you think?
Yeah, I think it is. There is, if I think to some work that I'm aware of that we do, it's in partnership with other organisations, and it's an addition to service. So when we look at any large organisation, they will have a contact centre. So you have the human element there, but it's more about it's gaining trust of those individuals, and it's having real-time, real-life resource that is actually able not just to impart information, but actually educate and upskill and encourage and build confidence in those individuals. And it's being able to have specialised people, not just in subject matter, but in people that are empathetic. And not everyone will need the same level of support. And I often think with potentially a good 99% of any customer support or of vulnerable support that's out there, we tend to find that it's very specific and general, and it's X, Y, and Z. In order to be able to physically help everyone, we need to be able to adjust that learner journey. Everyone's journey on anything is in different lengths from different starting points. So we need to adjust that journey to be able to get them to their end destination. That's
really interesting. So you also mentioned kind of regulatory fines for kind of large financial institutions. Obviously, whilst fines are an incentive for people to do things right and really support their customer base, what other legislation is out there that is really making organisations do what they can to support victims of fraud or cybercrime?
Again, multiple across multiple different markets. If we look at one that's quite prevalent at the moment, would be the Financial Conduct Authority's Consumer Duty Act, which is designed to get fair outcomes for consumers across product base and things like that. But it also mentions quite a bit about vulnerable customers. If we look at Ofwat, the water regulator, they've recently had an uplift in their legislation, which is heavily involved around vulnerable customers, and not updated yet, but previous Ofgem regulations stated in there that digital exclusion and low digital skills are a vulnerability. So the regulators are aware of this. I think when we look at kind of different things, I think the part of the legislation which is really, really important is the regulatory reporting requirements, which is a really, really, really good thing. And for me, it's really quite nice to see the regulators wanting to see those outcomes. It's not just lip service anymore. But on a humanistic basis, if you offer a service to someone that opens them up to be vulnerable, then as a human, do you not have a duty of care to be able to offer them support that's there? And if you are then encouraging going digital first, as firms are, I know that obviously a lot of firms have multi-channel or channel of choice, but with any scale in one direction, you have a reduction in the other. If we're going to continue with that trend and get that there, then people need the support they need to be able to continue with that, with confidence, really. I think there's the whole thing around this is confidence in the consumer. And when we talk about legislation and regulations, how much is it costing these organisations to effectively pay back fines, and often multiple times with the same people? Particularly if we look at particularly vulnerable individuals. Vulnerability is actually very transient. I think we label it too often. When we look at online, there's a misrepresentation that it's a certain age demographic that are vulnerable. It's not at all. If we look at some other vulnerabilities, mental health issues, for example, massively susceptible to cybercrime and manipulation. But as I said before, it's transient. Mental health can affect people in multiple different ways. It can be different in different times and different scenarios. Therefore, we need support that's there in the moment for the individual, tailored to the individual, but also not necessarily a one and done. And it has a farther-reaching aspect for the firms themselves. I know that if I've had good customer service, I will feel loyal to that brand. I will continue to be with that brand. And it's a competitive market out there. And if people feel loyal to that brand, they've had that support, they trust that company and that company's digital solution as well, they're more likely to stay with that organisation as well. And I think that that's something that I think that will definitely change in the future as we move to almost a completely digital solution. But this is never going to go away. Yeah. We haven't got 2, 3, 4, 5 years that it's not just 14 million that are completely digitally savvy at the high end of the skill spectrum. It will always be variable. There will always be a spectrum of people that are digital. There will always be people that are transiently vulnerable, and there'll be people that are completely vulnerable. So as much as it would be nice to say that we can put a timescale on this fraud and scam and online security issue because everyone will be at that point, we never can. And then we look to devices, for example. What do people use to access the internet? We're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. People can't afford the latest tech with the latest antivirus software. People on the low end of digital skills, when they're on their first journey, they don't update their software on the phone because they're skeptical of it. I actually did a lecture. It was an old person's outreach, an MP event in Birmingham. And I spoke there about like the benefits of being online. And we did a little workshop afterwards. And I said, if anyone needs any help with their device, come up. I'll be willing to do that. Fingerprint recognition, multi-factor authentication, just to try and break down some barriers and get them more secure. I would say a good, almost 100% of them, I think there was one, had outstanding software updates on the mobile device they were using. Wow. So they were all susceptible to some kind of attack.
Wow, that's really interesting. So Chris, talking about education then as a form of kind of cybersecurity, at what point do you think that should take place? Should it kind of be a preventative form of education before obviously the individual falls victim to cybercrime? Should it be kind of aftermath kind of thing, and helping them and supporting them at that point of need? Or should it be a combination of both? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's a really good question, and it's very broad. I think if we talk in terms of an education piece, I think a lot more needs to be done at grassroots level in schools. They're making great inroads into that. However, we are becoming a very mobile phone app based culture, and children out there, believe it or not, would be considered partially digitally excluded because they're great on social media, but they couldn't interact with an online form and things like that. So I think the education piece really starts at that grassroots level that's there. And I do think there is a place for advanced how to be safe online training. I think that would be quite an important piece. And I think with anyone who's currently digitally excluded and people with vulnerability that are sitting that portion of the people that are not interacting with the digital solution because they have fear, I think that giving a big message on how to stay safe online is definitely something that will be a catalyst for them to potentially get over their fear and get online. However, if we're looking at people in the middle ground that are kind of flirting with digital, that are kind of using it, what ends up happening with them is they build a confidence level because it's never going to happen to them. They have their own digital footprint, their own things that they physically use and are used to. So, and it's been proven in typical education that any sort of advanced learning or watch this, it would benefit you, has a very, very small take up. I think it's if it can be done through digital learning and it's there as an option if people want it. I think when we look at any solution to anything, be it proactive or reactive, we need to offer as many variable ways of that solution as possible to be able to help that individual in the way that they wish to be helped. I think that that's very, very important. To pigeonhole it to a single solution is almost a definition of exclusion, if I'm honest. But that being said, we know that people aren't going to uptake an educational piece. It is a fact. So not necessarily preventative, because something has to happen in the first place to have some kind of after the event care or support. What that then does is it allows people to get the knowledge they need when they're most susceptible, they're most open to it. Someone once said to me that you only go to the doctors when you're sick. You don't think about the doctors when you're okay.
Yeah.
That's when you want the doctor. So when you're going to want this support and help is when something happens, because it becomes a reality. It's no longer a thing that could happen to someone else. And I think that is there. And I think it should be multiple different ways of doing things. So stereotypically, if we look at a large organisation, the way that individuals make contact after they've fallen victim to online fraud or scam or any type of cyber attack is they pick up the phone. So that clearly identifies to me that's their channel of choice once something bad goes online. They've lost trust with online at that point. They're vulnerable, they feel it, so they pick up the phone. That's why if you look at the financial sector, for example, their fraud teams all have phone lines. So that shows that is the preferred channel of choice. It becomes nice and safe for those individuals. That's what they want to do. So if someone is fearful in that instance, the fraud teams that are in the financial sector, they give some support. They refund the person. That's the big thing that people want. They make them sure they're secure. But then is there just a handoff to here's some e-learning? Well, if they were confident online that they've been scammed, then would they not contact through a digital channel? So I think we need to facilitate channel of choice, but more in this instance, channel of confidence for them to be able to do that. And I think that it needs to be in that incident. A palm off isn't really sort of helping your vulnerable customer. It's almost like a go away to it. So if we need to think about the person in the instance of where they are and how they feel. And that's true of any vulnerability, if I'm honest. If we look at anything, and this goes along the line with, there's support lines and helplines for absolutely everything out there. Take some of the great stuff that's done. Samaritans have got one, Mind have got one, Rethink have got one. They're all phone lines because we know that that's more considered a vulnerable person with a channel of choice. And I think at that point, then we need to ask the question of the individual. First of all, do you want this support? Second of all, what kind of support do you want? In what format? In how, who, when, where, and what? We need to, as organisations, support the customers when they're at most vulnerable in the best method to them, and it will do numerous different things. It will have a dramatic increase in their confidence, which will keep that person engaged with the digital solution. It will definitely prevent it from happening again because we've given it in the methodology they want when they're most susceptible, so we know that they're going to take on more of that information. It will mitigate the fines that are potentially going to come out from organisations. It will mitigate them having to pay more fines again because they will have had better education, better uptake and better retention of knowledge. So that is how I would say the two education pieces went. We need both, very different. People are capable of different, but we can't choose one solution over another, otherwise we exclude people.
Okay, no, that's brilliant. That's, I think, a really nice summary from you there as well to end on. Really talking about bringing cybersecurity to the people, humanising it, and really giving people that education to support them in the matter of cybercrime. So, thank you so much for joining us today, talking about cybersecurity. It's been a great conversation. I've learnt lots, and I hope our listeners will have too. It's been great to have you.
Thank you very much.